Yeah, the Neurocaster was a really interesting element because it was much larger and clunkier than I had imagined in a way, and rightfully so because it's indicated so many different moments in the film with so many people using it that we have to recognize it and know what it is. And so inside of it, I really couldn't see much. And it allowed my imagination to soar and for me to create the image that I needed to create, i.e. where the drone was going and what it was doing.
Robots helping humans.
I know, it's nuts. No offense.
Get it all the time.
So, Giancarlo, I gotta ask, it's your first time working with the Russo brothers. What was it like? 'Cause I've seen you in other interviews talk about how seamless the transition was between the two guys, how it really felt like you were being directed by a cohesive unit. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because it's kind of interesting to think that you could theoretically start the day with one guy and end the day with another guy.
Yeah, I was always wondering how that worked, and from the moment I met Anthony in the trailer, and then Joe trailed in later when I was in Atlanta shooting a film, and they wanted to talk to me about being in this. I was down doing Megalopolis in Atlanta. I realized, wow, these guys speak very differently, but sort of speak the same language, and the nomenclature is the same. But what I noticed immediately was their warmth and their support in regard to starting with the word and how I felt about the script and what they were thinking in terms of ideas for the character. I was always suspect that how would that work, because actors need to trust, and to be able to trust both of these gentlemen in the same way, you get into a position where, and I hate comparing, which one do I trust more, and who am I going to really listen to? You know what I mean? But when you're, they opened their embrace to me intellectually, and also in the warmth of how they thought and expressed their feelings, not only about the whole movie, but how I fit into it, was really, really lovely. It's that kind of welcoming, and I was saying to them recently that I can only subscribe that it's like family. And treating someone in your family with respect and regard, not only for their intellect, but also for their heart and soul, and looking to their eyes and really asking truthful questions, then it elicits truthful answers. And so to me, that's the place to begin, and how you trust a director is going to get the best out of you, and you're going to deliver the best you can for them.
Well, that kind of brings me up to my next question for you, Stanley, is that you've worked with the Russo brothers before, and they're so good at kind of creating these massive kind of immersive worlds. But they also kind of don't lose the human element. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because I've also seen you talk about how, despite the fact that these movies are really technically, very challenging films, you do still feel like you get to put a stamp on it and improvise to some extent.
Yeah, it's true. They're very, I suppose, actor-oriented and emotion-oriented. They're the scenes, when you work on the scenes, they're always very carefully focused on the truth of the scene and how people really interact with each other within a space. So they're very good with movement, like a good theater director is. So, and then they take that movement and look at it and go, oh, here's what we do. We'll put a camera here, we'll put a camera there, we'll put a camera there. But it comes, for the most part, it initially comes from the actor. And where would a person naturally move, 2 people, 3 people, whatever, in that scene? That's what makes their movies so much better than so many other people's movies who have maybe just a purely technical mind, but don't really understand the subtlety of emotion and connection between the characters.
And Giancarlo, I wanted to ask you, one of the things that's kind of cool about your role is that a lot of it, you have to use this kind of avatar, right? And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what the process of filming that was like, because you really do have to express it all kind of just through this area here, right? And that must have been pretty challenging to you.
Yeah, the Neurocaster was a really interesting element because it was much larger and clunkier than I had imagined, in a way, and rightfully so, because it's indicated so many different moments in the film with so many people using it that we have to recognize it and know what it is. And so inside of it, I really couldn't see much, and it allowed my imagination to soar and for me to create the image that I needed to create, i.e. where the drone was going and what it was doing. So although I felt like, oh gosh, it's always a weird thing to cover up your face, it allows your inner thoughts and feelings to come out, and you vocally to use your voice in a different way, and the lower part of my face certainly could be seen to a certain extent. So it something for me, in some roles I like to feel like hiding is a good thing, and that it's not an obstacle for me to get around. It's something for me to pull through and allow all of the other elements and attributes I have physically to work. Now, granted, I'm sitting in a chair in an office, but some, shoulders when they're on a wider shot and lower jaw and things tightening, and then the reveal of taking off the Neurocaster really gives the audience an opportunity to see what my real emotion is. So I loved it. But the story behind all of that was so poignant for me in regard to how these gentlemen direct is that, originally the transition from the Neurocaster to the drone was a kind of a different thing, and originally it was a cowboy hat, 6 guns, Western kind of dude, which I love that analogy for, and it kind of morphed and changed as suggestions came through the technical aspect of what they were working on, and because originally faces weren't in the Neurocaster, and so that grew to happen. And when that happened, I realized the brilliance and the collaborative effort, technically and creatively, between Anthony and Joe and their team that just enhanced the movie greatly. So I eventually had to come back and do a lot of what I had already done again in a very isolated state, which was even more restrictive, so that they could really hone in on really what they needed emotionally to put in that little box. And I loved the challenge of it, the restriction of it, because I felt like I could grow through that and find something new to portray.
Well, thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the things I wanted to start talking about with you guys is I love the look of the movie, and I feel like I've seen dystopian future movies done to death, and it's really, really cool to see something that's kind of dystopian but set in the past with that kind of interesting mix of like quasi-futuristic but retro and familiarity. And I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about your style, because it was pretty cool to look at.
Yeah. I mean, it was intended for the movie's a fable, and we wanted it to be a fable and to play like a fable. And we always find too there's a strong theme in the movie about technology that's easier to process themes like that when you're dealing with, when you're in a period, right? When you move it away from where it is now. And so a lot of work was put into really trying to replicate the 90s in a way that, that was the decade where the digital revolution took over. It's where we transitioned away from being an analog society. And what, the concept that the graphic novel presents is so clever is, well, what would have happened if, we were more advanced in our technology at that moment? How would the world have played out? And that's really the approach we took. Just, spending a lot of time with our production designer, dreaming up this world, our DP, talking about the lighting, our VFX team, trying to integrate all of that so that, each robot, we understood how they moved, what technology was available at the time that, could have made their mouth operate, or what their wheel system was built around. And, the more of those questions you ask, the more you answer, the more specific to period it gets.
And when you're doing something like this, which is based on a really kind of classic graphic novel, but I guess it probably doesn't have the same kind of mainstream popularity as something like Marvel, do you kind of have more room to kind of put a different kind of take on it and to take different kind of risks with the material? Not that you don't do that with Marvel, but in this one, I feel like there must be some kind of freedom to really go outside the box and get crazy.
Well, you know, it's an interesting question, but I think we approach them both pretty similarly, to be honest with you. You know, we look at, you know, we're working with source material. When we work with source material, we do it because there's something in it we love, we're responding to, something in it that we find motivating and useful to build a narrative around. And we run at what we're passionate about, but we always look at it as our job as filmmakers to bring something to the narrative that wasn't in the book. You know, we don't feel like we need to stay trapped by our source material, because that source material is an expression in a book, whether it be a comic or a graphic novel. It's very specific to that form. A film is so different than that. And also, oftentimes they're being written, you know, the book and the movie are sort of being created at different times, sometimes vastly different times. So, and everybody's applying different sensibilities to these things. So we kind of look at it as our job to like take liberties. And what we want to honor is that thing that we are passionate about in the material.
Oh, thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for clicking on our video, everybody. If you like what you saw here, please make sure you like the video and subscribe and share with your friends who like this sort of content. JoBlo remains an independent company, and we appreciate all of your support.